Very interesting, compelling moment in history right now. So I'm really, really interested to hear your insights on all of this and more. So Kamali and Randy, take it away.
Hi, everybody. Oh. Test. Okay, we'll use this one. We'll see if we try to get this one to work too. Hi, everybody.
Hello. How's lunch?
Thanks for doing this chat and sticking with us during lunch. My name is Kamali Powell. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a fellow at the Kennedy School. And stick around for the 1:30 panel because we're going to be talking about legal frameworks. And my research is talking about displacement and how we understand protection, failures, and mobility for queer folks. Before that, I served as CEO of Rainbow Railroad, where I work closely with governments and the government of Canada to provide safe haven for LGBTQI plus facing persecution. So I'm really pleased to be joined by Randy Boissonnault. Randy is a Canadian business leader and former federal cabinet minister with deep experience around democracy, economic strategy, and inclusion. And just a little bit about Randy. He entered politics first as the member of parliament. We are a parliamentary system in Canada. We actually just patriated our constitution 40 years ago. We like King Charles.
That's a good
yes.
Be recorded.
He first entered member of parliament in Edmonton Centre, and we'll talk more about that in a bit. And during his initial phase in government, he was appointed the Prime Minister's Special Advisor for LGBTQ2 Issues from 2016 to 2019. And I'm just going to note, you'll see us using versions of 2S or 2 LGBTQI plus individuals, and that's to acknowledge that in Canada, we've had a long troubled history. And I'm going to say this at the front, there's a lot of characterization about Canada that is lauded, but we've done our own genocides and treatment of folks, in particular Indigenous communities, and so we use the word 2S to acknowledge two-spirited folks who are Indigenous within our acronyms. In that role of a special envoy or special advisor, he was a center of significant policy shifts in Canada, helping to advance the rights for 2S LGBT people. Famously, Prime Minister Trudeau apologized for the treatment of federal workers who were queer. We'll talk more about that in a second. And he hosted the Equal Rights Coalition in Vancouver in 2018, where we were able to secure funding for queer organizations domestically and internationally. That might have had some engagement with civil society, we'll get on that too. Following his return to public life in 2021, he held several senior cabinet roles, including Minister of Tourism, Associate Minister of Finance, and Minister of Employment, Workforce Development, and Official Languages. And during those roles, he was not only responsible for economic recovery, but also shaping workforce strategy. And I mention that because we're going to get into the Canada-US situation, and I want you to understand Randy's significant impact, not just from a queer lens, but also from an economic lens as well. So, and today, post-public life, he continues to advise governments, institutions, and organizations on democratic resilience, economic growth, and Canada's role in a changing global landscape. Randy, it's good to have you.
Well, thank you very much, Kamali. I feel like that was like a funeral. That was like my obituary. I'm done. I'm done at 55. I'm kidding. Thank you very much, Kamali. Thank you, Tim, and thanks everybody for avoiding the very sunny weather out there and enjoying the lunch and being with us today. I'm really thrilled to be here. I think the last time I was at Harvard was after I lost the election, and Victor Madrigal-Borlos did a convening here when he was still Special Rapporteur to the United Nations on SOGI issues, and I'm delighted to be here at the Carr-Ryan Centre. And I wanted to just give you a little bit of an insight into me.
Well, let me ask you the question first.
Okay, sure. Ask me the question.
I know. Maybe while you're telling us something about yourself.
Sure.
Why did you decide to get into politics? And because you won, but I guess you were a person before you ran for office.
I was a person before I ran for office, and I mean, just as you start eating, the tech decides to play ball, right? And it worked, we tested it. It's a gremlin in the system. She's got a plan. So I'm from Alberta, which is north of Montana, and it's a little bit like Texas and Alabama, thrust in the western part of our country. And my CD is Austin, Texas, okay? So, if you play your cards right, you can win as a Democrat. And in my case, we had a situation where we had a province that, imagine that the governor was the governor for your entire life, or at least the party was. So the Republicans, otherwise known as the Conservatives in our part of the world, led my province for my entire life. And I was born in 1970. And so there was a time when we had actually no federal representation other than Conservatives, 34 Conservatives, in a parliament of 338. And I got to the point where I didn't like what that Conservative government was doing to our country, how it was representing us internationally. And the only thing I could do was complain or flip a blue seat red in our situation, right? So there you go. So this is my mom, this is my nephew Andrew. He's got an older brother Ethan and an older sister Skylar. That's my partner Dave and I last year at Rio. And we took the thought that this community, 20,000 people at the Folk Festival in August, every year with 20,000 of my closest friends. And if you see the skyline behind us, that was my district, okay? So 85,000 souls, 55,000 voters, and in November of 2013, I came up with a crazy idea after we elected a very progressive mayor that maybe, just maybe, the people of Edmonton Centre would elect an openly gay, francophone, bald liberal to represent them in the federal parliament. And guess what? They did. And so to your question, how did we get it done? I knocked 25,000 doors.
Yeah, because the margin was slim.
Well, I got a business card that said, I want to be your MP. And I just started knocking on doors. And at the time, to be a Liberal candidate, you had to go and sell memberships because you had to win the nomination first. Okay, so what I had to do was go and sign up people. And at the time, you had to get $10. You had to get $10. And somebody had to sign their name on a Liberal form to become part of the Liberal Party. And that took me 9 months. And we signed up, I think 500 or 600 people. There was, I think, a total of 865 voters at the nomination, and we took 2/3 of the vote. So I became the candidate, and then I had 15 months to be the candidate, and everybody said I was the snowball in the hot place, and I had no chance of winning, and things just started to break our way over time. And what happened is, on election day, with 55,000 votes cast, we had 1,200 votes, and I got to go here. And I got to represent my people here, and I got to do this kind of fun stuff, which is be in the House of Commons and wear a pride scarf and have some people think it's a Métis sash. But we just had to educate people because in my first mandate, there were maybe 4 LGBT members of Parliament out on my side, only 1 on the Conservative side, 1 on the Democrats, and a handful in the Senate. And the reason I show this photo is because of the work that I got to do. I got to meet this guy.
Well, we'll get into that. But I mean, one of the things about Canada is that we are the gayest country in the world. But we've never elected more than 10 members of parliament that are queer, ever. And I think it's just some of the challenges of the concentration of LGBTQI+ folks in urban centers and gatekeeping from all parties in order to get people who can be elected. So it was pretty remarkable that you were able to win. So I want to talk about your appointment.
Sure.
And so we're talking about 2015 as the election where he got in. And former Prime Minister Trudeau, he actually wasn't supposed to win. Really? Like
We were the 3rd place party.
Stephen Harper had been in power for almost a decade. And trust me, at the moment you're feeling, we know, we've been there. It felt like that. And that's not being political, but we're allowed to be political here. So Trudeau gets in, primarily kind of going to the left of the party, And then all of a sudden, in 2016, the election happens, and there's President Trump 1.0 in the first election, and I think it'd be fair to say that the election of Donald Trump and his first campaign shifted the calculus around how Trudeau would operate his first administration. And in the middle of that, Canada forms a different trajectory. The government starts to make moves domestically, but also starts to position itself internationally as a different actor. And within that, they decide to appoint a special advisor for LGBTQ issues. So I guess my question to you is, to what extent do you see your appointment as part of this broader shift with the election of Trump? Was it simply about advancing US LGBTQI+ rights, or was there a broader political demographic play?
So if you'll allow me to just share a little bit of history, you have to go back to 1978, and the Quebec human rights legislation is the first province in the country to recognize homosexuality and to recognize queer people. Canada, to Kamali's point, has this brand now of being, an LGBT utopia in some respects, and we've got the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It was not always thus. And it was not Parliament that led, it was the courts that led. Civil society organizations went to the courts and got the laws changed and got the human rights legislation changed so that Kamali and I could enjoy the rights that we enjoy today. And then parliaments followed. There was a Liberal government in place. It was Paul Martin who passed first the legislation. It was the first Jean Chrétien who passed the legislation to see same-sex partners get benefits in the federal public service. That was the first big win we had in Parliament. And then 5 years later, we passed marriage equality. First country outside of Europe to do so. Jean Chrétien actually wanted to get ahead of Spain, but Spain got ahead of us. And then Paul Martin did it. Even under threat of, actually he was excommunicated by the Pope for doing it. And he went to Scott Bryson, who had crossed the floor from the Conservatives, and said, I just got excommunicated, you get equal marriage, you better go get married. And he did. And Scott served in our first mandate. But then the Conservatives came in 2006, and nothing changed in the SOGI space for 10 years. How do I know this? Because when I became special advisor, I asked neutral third-party federal public servants to give me a timeline of the advancement of LGBTI rights in Canada. And they went and they did 78, they did the things I told you, and then there's this interregnum from 2005 to 2015 where nothing happened. Because the other side simply didn't care. And quite frankly, were hostile. And so Justin Trudeau comes in, and let me set the stage there. So it's the summer of 2015, Stephen Harper's at the end of 10 years. He calls a 78-day campaign. Justin Trudeau is the leader of the third party in the House. The Conservatives have the majority, the opposition is the Democrats or Social Democrats, and then there's Justin Trudeau with a rump of 35 people, less than 10% of the parliament. We run a 78-day campaign on hope and hard work, and we win a majority government. We leapfrog the Social Democrats, we form a majority parliament, which has never happened in the history of the country, to go from third place to first place, and now it's like, oh, okay, now we get together. And so, did the Prime Minister and his team think that appointing a special advisor was going to be some sort of rebuke or comment on Donald Trump coming to office? No, because we had no idea. And let's take a look at the timeline. What Justin Trudeau knew was that he believed in his soul, because remember, he's the son of a former Prime Minister, right? He's the son of Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who served for 16 years, and for some people, he was our great philosopher king, Prime Minister, responsible for repatriating our Constitution and also giving us the Charter of Rights and Freedoms.
He did that famous quote that the government has no business in the best of the nation.
Yes.
It was a big quote in 1970.
So that was decriminalizing homosexuality in '69, and then, but he didn't go. He went far enough by decriminalizing it, but we'll get into what happened on his watch in a few minutes. So why am I giving you all of this background? Because the background is important, because Justin Trudeau comes in with a majority government. He did something also that was really important. He created the first gender balanced cabinet. 50% women in his cabinet. And I remember, because I was there on the steps of Rideau Hall, and when the journalist said, Prime Minister, why did you have a gender balanced cabinet? And he looked at them in the eye and he said, because it's 2015. Yeah. And that became a meme for about the next 2 years. You can still find it online. And we got to work very quickly to figure out how we could demonstrate to Canadians that government was able to be a force for good in our lives. And one of the communities that the Prime Minister saw was really important was the LGBT community. And so I did a couple of things on my watch as an MP. Remember, I'm coming from Edmonton. There's four liberals from Alberta. I'm this guy from Edmonton, openly gay, francophone. I'm the parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Canadian Heritage. And I see things that I don't like that are happening to members of my community. Like this young guy at a store called Party City in my community gets abused on his birthday. Somebody defaces his birthday cake because he's queer. And it gets in the news. And I'm like, this sucks. What am I supposed to do with this kid? How do I help him? And I'm sitting there at the end of QP. I have to sit in question period. I take out a piece of paper. I put it in a folder like this. And I say, Jesse, this is really terrible. Sorry this has happened to you. But know that you've got friends in places like Parliament. And then I passed it to my friend. And I said, Frank, you need to sign a note to this kid that got abused. And then I did that for 15 or 20 people, a bunch of ministers, other people. And then I said, wait a second, I'm gonna get JT. I'm gonna get the PM to send this kid a note. So I said to my team, please go to the drugstore and give me a card. And so they brought me a card and I sent a note to the PM staff. And they said, well, go talk to the boss. I said, Prime Minister, this is what happened. He goes, come and see me tomorrow after QP. We'll go up to the office. We did this. That's on a Thursday. So I called it. The phone number was posted. I called his mom, found out how to find him, told him what happened, except for the letter. She starts crying. She puts her son on. He starts crying. He said, will you come over and give us these cards on Saturday? So I did. They called the media. I didn't know the media was going to be there. But then I do the reveal of the JT card, and now it's a big story. And it was one of those feel-good stories that I actually didn't expect from my own community. Step one. Then in April of 2016, our friend, Doug Kerr, comes into my office in Edmonton, tells me he's doing this big LGBT conference in June, 400 people from around the world. He'd led something called at the time Dignity Initiative. It's now called the Dignity Network. And I said, Doug, would you be able to stop your conference for a couple of hours? He goes, sure, but why? It's because we're going to raise the pride flag on Parliament Hill. He goes, are you crazy? I said, yes. And then I made a rookie mistake. I said, how hard could that possibly be? Turns out it's bloody hard. And that every square inch of Parliament Hill is like a paramilitary organization. There are no flagpoles available. Anyway, long story short, we were going to do this on Wednesday. On Monday, I had no location and no flagpole. On Tuesday, I had a flagpole but no location. Wednesday morning, I had a flag and a flagpole, and it looked really terrible. And 3 hours later, when the Prime Minister's office stepped in, we had 400 people on Parliament Hill, over 200 MPs, and the first time in the history of Canada, a sitting Prime Minister raised the pride flag on Parliament Hill. Tour buses stopped. People brought their dogs to take photos with them, with the flag afterward. It was the most crazy thing we could ever expected. Look how skinny I am. I mean, look how much hair I have. And look, that's Scott Bryson. So the guy who got married because we changed the law, that's Scott Bryson, Minister Bryson. That's Seamus O'Regan, who would be minister with me later. That's Henny Fry, who was an ally and a champion for us before anybody was queer elected in Parliament. Justin Trudeau, that's the Honourable Rob Oliphant. That's one of our LGBT members from the New Democrats at the time, Randall Garrison. But look at all of those MPs. And what you don't see is the 450 people that decided to stop their day to come to Parliament Hill that day.
Okay, so we are the gayest country in the world. Yes. But let's talk about the appointment. And, you know, for civil society and the actual business of trying to advance queer rights for civil society, the US at the time, you know, was in Obama's second term. They had an ambassador, Randy Berry, who was advancing queer rights within the US space. And so I think there was some real interest and curiosity, we'll use that word, within civil society of a member of parliament being appointed to that work. So a politician, outside of a diplomat or someone or the bureaucracy. I guess, what do you think what problem do you think the government was going to solve by appointing a member of parliament, you, to this role?
So it's a really good question, and understand that I know that none of this has happened, okay? So I get a phone call on a Thursday and say, can you be available tomorrow? The Prime Minister wants to talk to you. That's either awesome or really, really bad. They didn't say which one. They just said, be available, the PM's calling you at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. And I'm like, oh, bloody hell. So I was ready, 9 o'clock, ready, come on, Premier Minister DC. I'm like, hello, boss, how are you? He goes, I just want to tell you, I see you, you're doing a heck of a job as an MP, you're becoming a very strong MP, and I need your help. Okay, what help do you need? The LGBT community needs somebody inside our government that can shake things up, open some pathways. We've got a lot of bad stuff to get through, but I want to help, but we can't help until we get some work done, and I want you to do that work. My Prime Minister, he goes, I would like you to serve as my special advisor for LGBTQ2 issues. And I was silent. And I said, boss, I'm speechless. And he starts laughing. He goes, oh, we both know that won't last too long. And I said, I am honored and absolutely I will do this. I said, but I have one question, Prime Minister. He said, what's that? I said, will there be a budget and will there be a team? And he starts laughing again. He said, see, I told you you're being a good MP. He says, yes, you'll have $2 million. And you'll have a team inside the Privy Council office and my entire authority to get this work done. And he said, so we're going to move fast. Don't tell anybody. We're going to decide when the announcement is. This is about 10 days before the election is happening here. And all the betting houses are still saying it's Team Clinton, right? So we think this is just going to be Canada's part of contributing to the moral arc of the universe going ever upward, right? We don't know what's coming until a few days later, until a few weeks later. And so I was stunned, I was speechless, and I want to quote because I pulled it up. I didn't realize I had it, but it's going to go into the Human Rights Museum. Here is the Prime Minister's secret letter to me, appointing to me as special advisor to him, and he says, I am pleased to name you as my special advisor on LGBTQ issues, special advisor, in addition to your current responsibilities as parliamentary secretary to the Minister of Canadian Heritage. If you agree to, and he says, as you know, the government is committed to ensuring the equality of all Canadians. In your capacity as special advisor, I ask that you provide me with advice on the development of our LGBTQ2 agenda. In particular, I ask that you consult and work with the LGBTQ2 community across Canada to determine how best to protect the rights of its members and to address historical and current discrimination. Among other things, your efforts will help the government respond to the recommendations of the June 2016 Egal Canada Human Rights Trust report on these issues. Now, those of you who are scholars and real constitutional nerds will know that when I read this next paragraph, my heart stopped. While performing the role as my special advisor, you will be an agent of the Crown in right of Canada.
So because I want to make sure we have time for questions, I want to stop at the Crown part. So what I'm hearing you say is that you have more power than a bureaucrat would have in this role.
So I didn't see it going in, but I can tell you why I think he did it in retrospect. We needed to get my colleagues in the political class educated on our community before we could have the bureaucrats take it on. Federal Public Service, I say that word with all respect. Because my secretary of 7, you remember Sam and Trevor and the team, we did more as a tube of 7 than some ministries of 700 could do in 10 years, and we did it in 3. How did I do that? Because I was able to move ministers. I was able to move parliamentary secretaries and my colleagues. 30 seconds. One time, a pharmacist came up to me, he's an MP, he said, Randy, if you're a trans person, does that automatically mean that you're gay? I'm like, oh, please sit down. And so I realized we had to go to caucus and we had to walk my colleagues, all 180 of them, through the nomenclature, which we did over the course of an hour and a half. The PM gave me an hour at this big caucus meeting. It was going so well, it stretched for an hour and a half. He said, let it go. And at the end of it, other people in the political part of our government started coming up with good ideas. And we'll go to one of those good ideas when I show you the fact that we did our first LGBTQ trade mission, and it wasn't my idea.
So, all right, so you get the appointment, you're in a position of power. I think the sense is in order to get anything done, you have to first reconcile for the abuses done in the past. And famously and tearily, former Prime Minister Trudeau went to Parliament and apologized for the past abuses of federal servants, or known, we call it the LGBT purge. Talk about that moment and talk about why the apology was necessary in order to move anything further.
From the 1950s until 1991, the federal government systematically persecuted, studied, harassed, and purged LGBTQ people from our federal public service, our federal police force known as the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and the federal and our armed forces. And it's to the point where you were rising. I remember her. Her name is Lucy. She was the brightest star in the Canadian Armed Forces in one of the regiments in Quebec. And they suspected she was a lesbian. They followed her to lesbian bars. They took photos of her. They put her in deep, dark interrogation rooms for hours at a time. She left once, she came back again. They persecuted her again, she left again. This happened hundreds and hundreds of times. It's well documented. And so there is no way that we could help the LGBT community create new pathways, create funding sources, have people trust us until we got this work done. And so I was under a lot of pressure, you will know, from Helen and others. So I came in October of 2016. They wanted the apology like in February of the next year. And I said, no. This was my first test. And I said, we will take the time that we need to take to meet with Canadians where they are, so that when this apology is made, it lands in the right way. And how could I do an apology unless I actually knew that we would be able to put something in the window? Right? Because you can't just do an apology and then wait a year to actually have things that are going to resonate with people. So while we were doing the deep work to apologize to the community, we got the rights of trans people protected in the criminal code and in the Canadian human rights legislation. We got work done to change the way that we did census data to protect people and to get the details so we could actually show people where the funding went. But the importance of the apology, and I'll never forget it because I was supposed to sit behind the PM and one of the ministers was like, no, you did too much work in this, you're sitting next to him. And I sit next to him and Lucy was not gonna come to this event. I spent 3 hours with her on the phone and I said, Lucy, just come and listen to the PM because I helped write the apology and I think it will make a difference. And I see the Prime Minister, I see Lucy up in the gallery with her red beret, full dress uniform. And the Prime Minister is standing and he says, we betrayed you, we were wrong, this will never happen again. And Lucy stands up and salutes him. And the tears are streaming down his face. And I get a tap on my shoulder and I pull on his sleeve and point up and he looks at her and the tears start streaming down his face. And she went to see him after the reception and she said, Premier Ministre, I have not sung the O Canada since 1972. Because that's when this government kicked me out of the armed forces because of who I am. But now you've given me my O Canada back. And you've given me my sense of place back in this country. That's why the apology mattered.
Yeah, you got that. So, with the apology, and that public apology, and the flag raising, starts to come expectations that you better do shit. At least that was my expectation, leading an organization. And I'll tell you, one of the stories that kind of put Rainbow Railroad on the map was this, unexpected international crisis in Chechnya. And I cannot believe it's almost been 10 years since that intervention. But I want to frame two things that happened in advance to it and I want you to tell me about the power of this role and really test this out. So a couple things happened. After the election of Donald Trump, I know it seems forever ago, but you gotta remember he won off the success of the Muslim ban and then enacted it. And shortly after the enactment of the Muslim ban, Prime Minister Trudeau responded via tweet that said, Canada is a place that's welcoming for migrants. We see you. And here I am running an organization that is supporting LGBTQI plus people, leave persecution. And here I see the government of Canada say, we love the gays, we love migrants. And I'm like, okay, prove it. And then this international incident happened where For those of you who don't know, in 2017, Novaya Gazeta, a important publisher in Russia, and the New York Times posted that seemed like a horrific event. Hundreds of people being detained by the state of Chechnya, Republic of Chechnya, run by strongman Roman Kadyrov, being essentially tortured for weeks, being exposed to now to their families, being told to do honor killings. And activists were trying to figure out what to do. We managed to get a couple people out of the pipeline, but the problem was that Chechnya was a republic of Russia. And we'll talk, preview for my talk about displacement this at 1:30, but for displacement frameworks, these people were stuck within their country. And because of bilateral relations, and you gotta remember, this is 2016, right? Where everyone's talking about Russian foreign interference, if you remember all back then, and the power of the state, and whether Donald Trump was cahoots with Russia, there was really limitations on how to get people out except for government intervention. So, Canada, what can you do to help get these people out? I'll bury the lead. We ended up getting 200 people out, and we got people out of Chechnya, but I wanted you to talk about what was the mechanism of this role that enabled us to be able to get the government to convince you to get people out.
So governments are inherently siloed, and they're fiefdoms. They're just locuses of power inside a bigger power structure, and nobody wants to share power, and they don't want to share data. And so when you have essentially a rogue actor like me, with the power of the Prime Minister's office behind you, and a team of 7 or 8 in the Privy Council, you can do some things that you otherwise can't do. You can force conversations, you can force people to meet. And so the federal public service was not going to move unless they had a clear signal from 3 ministries. We needed immigration, we needed Privy Council, PMO's office, but we also needed global affairs.
And I guess this is a point to, I think, talk about the distinctions between Canada and the United States. When a new government comes into power, like in the US, right, the bureaucracy comes in as well, right? So appointees and folks who help the campaign. It doesn't quite work that way.
I'll give you the numbers. Right? So we have 338 parliamentarians. In my time, we had 40 ministers. You can imagine that there's a political class of about 1,500 to 2,000 people on Parliament Hill, okay? But how many federal public servants are there? At the time, 270,000. And now we're at 330,000. So who's got the inertia? Who can slow down and wait out a government? If they want, the federal public service in Canada. So what Kamali was up against was trying to go through the public service channel and getting roadblocks because there's 5 people on top of them that have to make decisions. And I'm like, we are not doing this, we don't have time, there's people at risk. So I took something that I knew from the corporate world, and I said, we're gonna create a tiger team. And we're gonna force people in a room until they figure out what the new pathways are, because I'm pushing for results. And Chrystia Freeland, who was our Deputy Prime Minister and our Minister of International Trade at the time, she was Finance Minister when I was Associate Finance with her. She's from Ukraine. She's of Ukrainian descent. She's a Ukrainian
She was
Canadian.
Foreign Affairs Minister.
She was Foreign Affairs Minister at the time. She'd been trade. She was Foreign Affairs. She knew what we were trying to do. And so I knew that if I could get to Chrystia and she could basically create a whole bunch of space for us in global affairs, that would be one of the boxes. And then I had friends inside of the immigration department who trusted Kamali to a certain point, but had never been able to like leap off the cliff with you, because they didn't know if this civil society activist person that doesn't really need any government money, operates in 2 different countries, is he going to be friend or foe when the chips are down, if we can't deliver on everything we want? And I said, you can trust Kamali, I trust Kamali, we are gonna get this done. At the end of the day, it was all relationships. And so that Tiger team, I can see them. I can see Olga, I can see Thierry, I can see my team meeting in my office, we're patching you in, and we're like, we are going to get these Chechens out of Chechnya to other borders so that they are not then caught in their tilt-a-whirl, so that then we can activate their ability to get to Canada, to Germany, to Australia, to Argentina, and they got to choose where they went, thanks to your work. But it was only through the fact that I had the authority that I had and the relationships that I had, and we got a couple of lucky breaks with the right people. But at the end of the day, if you go to people and you say, you have the chance to change the life of a person that will probably not survive the next 3 months, let alone in the next 3 weeks. What are you gonna do? Because at this moment, you're the government. And do you wanna act like the government, or do you wanna hide behind somebody else? And in this case, they decided they were the government, and we got the work done.
So, start thinking about your questions. Before we talk about Canada-US relations, I want to talk about money. Because I think one of the things about Canada re-entering the scene was that, okay, these are all nice, Canada, okay, you're doing nice, great work, but you don't have skin in the game, right? The Obama administration, they're pumping money into the system, that money's reducing, but how can you actually say you're an arbiter for queer rights around the world unless you're doing real investments both domestically and internationally? How did you get money into the system?
So I got burned in the 2018 budget. I got no money. I was not happy. And I said never again will I have no money. So then I used the next year to work with civil society to create a burning platform that I would then have to be the firefighter for. See what I did? See what we did? Government moves when civil society is hot and bothered. And in this case, I needed the international community to come to this event in Vancouver with Chrystia Freeland, she was our foreign affairs minister, and raise holy hell that Canada wasn't doing enough. And I pushed, and I was hoping I'd make a $4 million or $5 million or a $10 million announcement. They gave me nothing. I go to this event, we have people from around the world, and all of our people from Canada, and I get, you were there, Gene, and I get no money. They're like, well, maybe at some point we can announce 3-4 weeks from now that there's $1 million to help people, human rights defenders. I think this is bupkis. Anyway, the long story short, Kamali wasn't happy, Helen Kennedy wasn't happy, our internationals weren't happy, and there was going to be a mutiny.
Well, actually, this is why it's good to be a black gay man within these spaces, is that everyone, in Canada, because people said they were going to write a note. And I said, it's my HB activism. I said, like, we're going to storm the stage. Like, let's do something. And my colleagues were like, what is this crazy gay man doing?
And I loved you for it.
But we were, how could we just create this, like, host this convening where we're going to say how great Canada is and not leave? Because in general, I hate conferences, not this one.
Well done.
It's a great conference. It's the best conference. It's the best convening. But I didn't want. I was like, how can we leave this space without a clear commitment? And so, what did you do?
Well, you gave me the heads up that the community was very unhappy. We triangulated that with Helen, and then I pulled the Global Affairs rep and the PMO rep into a room with my Director General, and I said, so a mutiny's on the way. It's gonna happen this afternoon, and we have a choice. We can be the government, we can announce the $1 million we have, but we have to go further than that. And Chrystia Freeland, I went to Chrystia and I said, I'm gonna stave off a mutiny. You have to agree to be at a table with our global affairs bureaucrats, the federal public servants who have said time and time again that the LGBTQ2 community is too small. We think at 5 million and up. And you folks want 50,000 and 500,000. We can't even get our systems organized for something that small. We're gonna have a meeting. This was in August. This meeting was in August. We will have this meeting in Ottawa in October. And I need you to sign off on that, and I need you to be there. And I need you to tell the community here that you will do it. And she agreed. And so that's what we went back to you folks with. I made the announcement at this speech right here for the $1 million. I also said that we would meet in October and convene that group. And guess what happened in October? And I have the proof here. I have the agenda, and I have the names of all the people who attended that meeting. And boy, was it tense.
That's so triggering.
But it happened, and I can tell you, Kamali did his homework again that day. Because you had all these officials that had to come to the table and say why for the last 15, 20 years they didn't help the LGBT community. Now we had allies in there. We had members of the community who wanted to move things, but their superiors weren't letting them do it. By the end of these conversations, this amazing woman, I'm not in cabinet yet, remember, right? I'm a special advisor. This amazing woman, who's the Minister of International Development, Marie-Claude Bibeau, she's now the mayor of Sherbrooke, Quebec. Doug Kerr, we've got all these fabulous people there who pushed. This was the announcement of $35 million to the international community over 5 years and $10 million a year ongoing. We got it done because we figured out how to have civil society push the government just far enough but then we built new pathways in the system. And a minister came to the table and said, she literally said, needs to be a legacy for our government. Now, how do we get the other money?
Well, we're gonna.
You want to go somewhere else?
Yes,
Okay.
just for time's sake.
Sure.
I want to say this gently though. So you did good work and then you lost.
Yeah, that really sucked.
And so to my earlier point about the fragility of these institutions, we haven't had the role since. We've had advancements in queer rights. We've had the role within a ministry, but we never had the same degree of power that we did when we had an elected official. And you went back, you won again, surprisingly again. Congrats. But for civil society, we had a glimpse of what was possible. And I'm curious about whether there was any lessons learned from the role being within the power of an elected official, and how that power could be transferred within a bureaucratic role or civil society role.
So I'll do this really quickly because I think there's a thesis in this. I think I need to do some writing in this space. And you and I probably disagree on the evolution of it, but I knew that I was going to lose the 2019 election. I could see the numbers. It was going to be an election on Justin Trudeau's credibility in the West, which was low. We had a new governor, a new premier coming to our province. Anyway, the long and the short of it, we had to prepare for the eventuality that there would not be a special advisor. So I wrote a memo to cabinet with a minister who was the Women and Gender Equality Minister, Marianne Mons at the time, so that we could take the Secretariat and give it a permanent home inside Canadian Heritage. We architected that in case I lost the election. And that's exactly what happened. Now, if you take a look, and this is what's interesting about what civil society sees as their access into government, and actually the power and the way that government moves. So it is now 7 years after I lost the election. This is the difference, in part, between that first mandate, when we had one cabinet minister who left, who was LGBT.
Oh.
These are all, 5 minutes, good. These are all ministers, okay? So Seamus is a minister, I'm a minister, Pascal's a minister, Rob's a Parlsec, he's an honorable. There were 4 cabinet ministers from the community in that second mandate that I had. And Marcy Ian, pictured here, 8 years later, more flags being raised. This woman was responsible for the entire LGBTQ community in her ministry with an $800 million roadmap, and we put now already $150 million down on that roadmap because it's in the society. The missing piece is the visible person, and so I can tell you this now because it's long enough in the tooth. I wrote a document for the government in between the 2 mandates to have a special envoy that would be internationally facing, because the minister could do the domestic stuff, but that Canada could benefit from an international envoy. And for reasons that I still cannot yet determine, at the 11th and a half hour, they pulled back from doing that, and then we all went into pandemic, and that issue has now been lost for a while. And in the current climate, I don't think it's going to happen.
Let's talk about the current climate. So I thought we had a little bit more time. So raise your hand if you have a question. I'm going to start. Let's talk about the current climate.
Sure.
So I think every time I see someone, they talk about Mark Carney's Davos speech. And I think if you're a Canadian, you don't think that speech is that remarkable. It was very measured. It was a very matter-of-fact speech, but as we all know, it resonated pretty strongly around the world. And so, talking as someone who is not just special advisor of 2 LGBTQ issues, but as someone who was a minister within employment and economic force, I want to really get your opinion of this Canadian-U.S. moment. Because I was here last year when I heard all the 51 First State talk, and it was being situated here in the U.S. as well as Trump, right, within the U.S. media ecosystem. And I remember going back home in March to visit family, and I was in Toronto, in a suburb, and I going for brunch. I noticed Canadian flags everywhere in the neighborhood. We don't do that. It's a very uniquely American thing. And I marveled at the flags everywhere. And I was like, oh wow, we took this seriously. And as you can see through it is, if you've not been following Mark Carney's speeches then, he's basically said we need to reimagine our alliances, which is something that we would never have grown up to think in Canada. Talk about that moment from a perspective of an elected official about where we are now.
So here's Mark Carney raising the pride flag on Parliament Hill, just to show you that values continue across administrations. What Mark Carney said around the world stage, and I was traveling when he said it, basically he said what was on the lips of world leaders and business people and NGO leaders around the world, because something has shifted. And people in this country listen to your president. I have friends in my business world who have pulled their business from Canadians because Donald Trump has said that the business needs to be here only in the United States. That, and I can tell you that the relationship between Canada and the United States will take a generation or two to repair. And a month ago, I was speaking at the Center for the Study of the Presidency in Congress in DC, in which I'm a former fellow, and they love having electeds back. And so I came into the speech and I said to the youth who were there, the alumni and the youth, 27 scholars, I said, every generation has to renew the relationship between Canada and the United States. And it's up to people in this room to decide how you're going to do that. And I can do that with my counterparts here, but the next generation also has to do that. And the question is, do you want to? Because the very clear signal that we're getting is you don't. And I am systematically reorganizing my business life to help the Prime Minister and the entire Canadian government get $300 billion in non-US investments into our country over the next 10 years so that we diversify our trade away from the United States. And how have we been doing? We've got $100 billion so far. So like a good banker, I think Prime Minister Carney has lowballed his number, because he's 1 year into his mission and he's already at $100 billion. And so I can tell you, I've spent a week in France, a week in Japan, a week in Mexico City, a week in Bogota, a week in Brazil, and a week in Montreal. And this whole take a look at Canada is something I've never seen in my life. And what people want to say is, we thought we were going to look at the US, we want to take a look at you now. It's real. And I can't sugarcoat it for you because you wouldn't want me to. But what it's also doing is we are now going to spend $90 billion in defense over the next 5 years. And for the first time in my lifetime, we're going to make our own stuff. Saab out of Sweden, and now the South Koreans have said, if you buy our stuff, i.e. not US stuff, we will make it in your country, and we will maintain it in your country, and we will train Canadians how to do this so that you have that legacy. That is what's at stake from the posturing of the current government. And for the first time in my lifetime, we are having a global investment summit for Canada in Toronto in September, and the world's coming.
I want to make sure we have time for at least one question before we wrap. If anyone has a question.
We have 10 minutes left.
Oh!
We just have 1 minute left.
I'll steal the first question.
Okay. That makes more sense. Okay. I feel like Julia Roberts at the Oscars, like when the conductor is trying to drown them out with the music.
I want to talk about the 20 million before we go, with 1 minute left, unless you have a question.
Let's get on to the last question.
Yes.
I'll steal the first question
Yes.
as point of privilege here as my partner. So one of the themes of our program actually is geopolitics, because that is a important part of what's happening in the international LGBTQ scene. And in this realignment, we have this new actors coming into play, BRICS, for example, and others that want to kind of redefine the potency the U.S. have through its institutions, the World Bank, the IMF, etc. But they are also introducing a lot of anti-LGBTQ values into this like American realignment. So where do you see Canada's role in trying to keep both like the values first foreign policy it has, but then trying to build enough political power, right? This middle powers idea and the conflict that comes into that.
So I think there's a couple of things at play here. One, there is new architecture being built right now of middle powers. The Davos speech was not the beginning, it was sort of the end of the first stage of that. And so we're talking about Brazil, Mexico, Australia, South Korea, Turkey, Japan, playing in ways that they haven't, And you're seeing the new commitments to militarization that haven't been there in a generation. So that's point one. Point two is the money that we put on the table for civil society organizations needs to continue working in those spaces, but so does the work of other civil society organizations. And in the absence of USAID, other countries like the Dutch, like the Germans, like the Nordics are going to have to do some more work in this space. And in 2019, Nick Herbert, who was a minister in the Boris Johnson government, he's now in the House of Lords, and Helica Lozano, who was a senator in Colombia, she just lost, and I created the Global Equality Caucus. It is a network of what we hoped would be 200 to 300 LGBT parliamentarians when we launched at World Pride in 2019 in New York. We are now at 820 LGBT electeds at the state, provincial, and municipal levels to do exactly what you're talking about, which is to exercise that kind of power so that we work with those people who might go down the populist path, but help them realize that diversity, inclusion is better for all our societies. And the current government of Brazil understands that. It's not the case in all the states. But look what happened in Argentina. I mean, the 5 weeks that I spent on the road and my new client out of Mexico City is entirely because I was on trade missions through the Canadian Queer Chamber of Commerce. Think about that. I've been traveling the world thanks to work that our government did, and now we're doing this because inclusive economy is just how Canada rolls.
Any other questions? So, before you take the mic, I'm gonna push back on this a little bit.
Go for it.
Just for context, one of the things that happened under Prime Minister Trudeau is that alongside making a more inclusive cabinet, he also established feminine foreign policy famously and got ridiculed about it, but also it created a cascading of small other governments that also decided to adopt feminist foreign policies. Carney abolished that posture. What does that signal for queer rights if Mark Carney has no more use for the feminine foreign policy?
So my sense is that what the Carney government is doing is pulling back from the criticism that our government got, which is that we were doing too much virtue signaling and not enough delivering on policy. I can tell you, there's nothing that's changed in the LGBTQ2 framework on not on money, not on policy. We went to Mexico City and the embassy was open arms as if we were a straight trade mission. So what you're seeing this government do is it's less talking about what we're doing, and this government continues to do the doing. If you talk to women in gender equality, the only department that did not get a cut in the last round of cuts was women in gender equality. So she got no cuts. Now, I'm not defending them. What I am saying, though, is that there is a continuation of the values there, but you're not going to see the same talking about it. And if you take a look at the money, I'm going to watch to see what's in the next budget, and now we're into fall budget cycles, to see if there is a commitment in women and gender equality to the LGBTQ community, because the last round of funding ran out, and so they need to top it up. That'll be a litmus test.
But symbols matter and stories matter.
They do.
Right. Yes.
Hi, I'm Kate Hudson. I'm a first-year PhD student at the Harvard T.H. School of Public Health. I'm not sure if this is working, but I'm going to hold it for power anyway.
Good for you. Do it.
Are you going to No, it's okay, it's okay. Oh, okay. All right, I have two now. Extra power. So I was thinking through this question, was trying to make it as concise as possible, but basically I believe that the true transformational culture-shifting work of LGBTQIA2+ liberation happens in opposition to colonial governments. And I'm curious how your government is working in conjunction with work that's happening outside of its sort of reaches. Like, are you collaborating with community partners? Are you looking at land back? Like, how I think that's inherently intertwined in like queer stuff. Like, that's kind of my question. Yeah.
So we don't have 2 days to answer your question, but I'll give you some indication. Part of the reason that I didn't rush to do an apology is I needed to go deep into community. I hadn't spent a lot of time with the trans community before I was special advisor. I didn't understand. So I did my own homework, and I remember one seminal meeting at Winnipeg at their Rainbow Community Center, and 2 young trans adolescents came. They were in 16, 17. And then there was a woman who was in her 70s. And she said, I spent my entire time in the federal government I had a great time, and I'm now helping the community. And the two younger trans kids, after the session, said to her, we didn't know as trans people that we got so old. And she smiled, and she said, we didn't know that we became so beautiful either. They had never met. They were living in the same community. But that placemaking, that convening, is what helped them to meet each other in their own city. The same we did in the Two-Spirit community. I didn't know a lot about the Two-Spirit community. So we did a deep dive into the Two-Spirit community, and it turns out that the Two-Spirit community had a lot to teach us about having, quite frankly, two spirits, but talk about a community that existed before colonial government. That's the Two-Spirit community, right? Back 10, 11, 12 millennia, before any of us were here. And so the fact that our government put in and adopted the policies of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People was a proof point for me that we were prepared to go beyond some colonial structures. But this work is not going to be done in my lifetime. And so there's more work to be done.
One more question.
Okay, I'll ask him. No, any other final questions? Before we go, okay, let's talk about the 20 million.
Sure.
Right before we end. Actually, no, I'm gonna ask a different question.
Sure.
You could rope in the 20 million. Because I wanna end with your thoughts. We're at a Global LGBTQI Rights Summit. I think it's not good, right? Things are, I think we're all feeling we're feeling that we're fucked. And I want to, pardon my language, but like in the state of regression of LGBTQ+ rights, we are looking for clear leadership backed by resources in a time of austerity, at a time when people are sending the wrong signals, including our Prime Minister, about taking real leadership and a clear stand for queer people. So I guess to close, maybe with some reflections as you being a leader, what advice would you give to our current government around how Canada could provide leadership? And what insights do you see around the state of global queer human rights and how Canada can play a leadership role?
So I'm on the record already, and Doug Kerr knows this, he's running Dignity Network. We need to double the amount that we're doing every year to the international community. It's 10 million a year, it should be 20. I'm on the record for that, so I'll state that again here. And look, there's an $800 million roadmap for the queer community at home. There needs to be another down payment on that. So it should be at least as much as was done the last 5 years, which is 100 million. It should be that and more. And I think the Canadian government could lean in and help figure out and demonstrate some additional leadership in the Equal Rights Coalition space, which I know civil society has their own questions about. But then I think we have to go deeply personal, and Evelyn put her finger on it, and we didn't actually mention it. I think whether it's in this country or whether you all come to Canada, there needs to be a massive convening of all the people in this space to figure out how the community survives long term. The funders, the donors, the people who've pulled back, the NGOs, the organizations, the companies that are prepared to stick their necks out, now's the time. You have foundations in this country that are looking to be re-domiciled in Canada so that they can protect their assets. That is the state of play. And I, on one of these trade missions in Japan, I had a 2-hour bus ride to the airport, and I decided that I could have a very comfortable life for the next 20, 30 years, or I could do something to make a difference. And I've chosen the second path. And so I am doing foreign direct investment, and I'm doing trade facilitation, and I'm creating my own private sector corporation that will have enough wealth that I can be part of this fight. Because I don't want the Stephen Millers of the world to win.
So this is who you're gonna get your money from?
Yeah.
Write your address, get his card. What's the name of your memoir?
Do I have 3 minutes, Tim?
You have 30 seconds.
30 seconds. It's called All the Peoples. I was at Oxford. I was so deeply in the closet in the 90s when I was at Oxford that when the little collective would meet in my college, I'd be like almost the next community, but I could still keep my stipend as a Rhodes Scholar. I got to go back 20 years later as an MP and as a special advisor. they asked me to speak at Rhodes House because they did their first LGBTQ meeting. And as I came into the community, there were pride flags everywhere. I'm like, what the heck's going on? This is not the Oxford I remember. And I went on Google, and it turned out that it was the UK Pride Month. I was like, this is pretty cool. So I did the thing at Oxford, and a friend of mine said, come for brunch. We're gonna have brunch on Sunday. So I went to see Imogen, and Imogen brought Ben and little son Sebi, and she said, I want to tell you something that happened. We were walking around earlier this week, and Sebi, that's Sebi, kept pointing up at all the rainbow flags. He said, Mommy, what do these flags mean? And like a good law professor, Imogen spent 20 minutes telling Sebi what the pride flags meant. And at the end, she said, now tell Mommy that you understood what the rainbow flags mean. And his answer so completely floored her that at brunch, Imogen turned to Sebi and said, Sebi, tell Uncle Randy what the pride flag means to you. And he looked at me with those big, beautiful brown eyes, and he said, all the peoples. If a 4-year-old can figure it out, so can the rest of us. And I can't wait to see how high we soar together when we figure this all out. Thank you very much.
Please give her thanks to Randy. Thank you so much, Randy, for giving your time, and thanks for being a leader. Appreciate it. Thank you all for having us